Hello and welcome to this video. Today I'm excited that the board of Type Weekend has given me the opportunity to share some of my experience working with the Javanese script. And thus here we are in this video presentation titled Working with the Javanese script, an effort to revive the script typographically. My name is Aditya Bayu Perdana. You can call me Adit or Bayu. I'm an architect by day, but during my spare time, I like to delve into the unexplored world of Indonesian script typography. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. Today we'll be talking about the Javanese script, and for that we have to travel to Indonesia, a tropical chain of islands with diverse culture and home to over 700 living languages, according to some estimates. Now, not known by many, even amongst Indonesians themselves, is the fact that the country is also home to about a dozen indigenous writing systems. Unfortunately, all of them has been supplanted by the Latin alphabet in everyday use, so you would not find these scripts unless in specific or very limited contexts. Today we're going to zoom in into the island of Java here, south of the equator. It's a relatively small island but densely populated, with a long history and also home to the Javanese script, natively known as Aksara Jawa or Hana Choroko. The Javanese script is a Brahmi-derived writing system. Each letter represents a syllable that ends with the vowel A. A variety of diacritics, shown here in red, is used to modify the basic letters. While primarily used to write the Javanese language, the Javanese script is also used to write Sanskrit, Old Javanese, Sundanese, Maduranese, Malay, and Indonesian, among other languages. You can see some of the characters here. On the left, we have the basic consonant letters. There are around 30 plus inherited from the original Sanskrit model, but from all of these, only 20 letters have distinct sounds in the modern Javanese language. The rest of the letters are usually repurposed or only used in specific cases. In the middle, we have the conjuncts, which is used to write consonant stacks. On the top right, we have the diacritics used to change or modify the basic consonant letters. We also got numerals and a set of elaborate and partly decorative punctuations. The Javanese script has its root from the ancient Brahmi script of India. A southern Brahmi variant called Pallava was used in southern India and Southeast Asia from the 6th to 8th century AD. In the Indonesian archipelago, Pallava evolved into the Kawi script, and the Kawi script itself was used for about 8th century until it gradually evolves around the 16th century into the Javanese script. Alongside the Nabalina script, its closest relative, as well as other regional scripts of Indonesia. The script was actively used by the Javanese people from at least the 16th century until the mid-20th century, during which the script came to be written with various medias for various purposes. Inherited from the Hindu-Buddhist period practice, early Javanese scripts were written in palm leaves, locally known as lontar. Pen and paper came to be used with the spread of Islam to the island of Java, and it became the dominant medium of writing. With the arrival of Europeans, printing and metal type in the script greatly increased the number of Javanese script materials from around the 19th century onward. In 2009, the Javanese script was allocated its own block in the Unicode standard, thereby facilitating its use on devices and digital platforms. All of these contribute to the Javanese design legacy today. It's helpful to note that for most of its history, the island of Java is divided into many small regional polities. Since most of these regions are relatively isolated with each other, many courts and regions, even within a short distance of each other, have their own distinct style of writing. For example, here are two royal letters from the neighboring courts of Surakarta and Yogyakarta in the central Javanese hinterland. The courts of this region is considered the center of classical Javanese culture, and so its literary tradition commands a degree of prestige among other Javanese polities. Moving north, the northern shore of Java frequently engage with foreign influences due to trade activities, and thus some coastal examples from this region show distinctly foreign design elements incorporated creatively into the basic skeleton of the script. Shown here, for example, is a manuscript from Cirebon where the scribe adapted Latin serif and thin thick strokes. And here we have a plaque from the Cirebon Palace with stylized Chinese clouds motif in its letter design. Around the early 1800s, increasing interest for the Javanese language and literature prompted the creation of the Javanese movable type. At the time, the Surakartan style was considered as the most refined and frequently cited as the ideal form for type designers to aspire. However, with its extreme flourishes that necessitated huge descender and ascender space, It was very difficult to emulate in print. Printing anything with this kind of style would need a lot of printing space and make everything more expensive. And so balancing this ideal style with the economic and technical reality of the time has been the central preoccupation of designers of the time. However, in 1838, a satisfactory typeface was completed by Takororda. His typeface was well received and would become the standard in Javanese publication for the century to come. The proportion and shape of Roder's typeface, in accordance with the wisdom of the age, is inspired by the Surakartan handwriting. While it's certainly not as extreme as the real thing, Roda kept the principle in which the descender and ascenders are decidedly larger than the X height of the basic letter. He also added European typographical elements such as thin, thick contrast, which was considered novel for Javanese body type up to that point. Now that Javanese type is available, printing and publishing stuff in a Javanese script became a thing. Printed Javanese appears in official as well as popular use. On the left is an official government document issued by the Palace of Yogyakarta, and on the right is a cover page of a popular magazine called Kajawen. And it was not only plain text type that are being developed. Elaborate decorative type was also explored to a quite sophisticated degree. One of the earliest examples is Gifigured Javanese, shown here, and the style is so heavily imbued with Baroque and Rococo vibe that I would say it would not look too out of place in places like Versailles. And specific European design phenomenon came to be used in Javanese typesetting as well. For example, drop caps in the above picture, Dongeng-Dongeng Piantengan book, and also below is a mass hat for the Bromartani newspaper, Java's first Javanese language newspaper. And notice how it uses the Latin black letter as the main design element of its Javanese mass hat. And this is my personal favorite example, is a book plate published in Semarang in 1898 commemorating the ascension of Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands. And in this single paper, you can see a wide variety of typographic style applied to the Javanese script. Another common design trope is the Imboto style, frequently used for book titles, in which the letters are rendered in blocky geometric shapes. It can have contrasting strokes, monoline, slightly octagonal, or even reverse contrast, here shown at the bottom. As print culture matured and demands for book rises, Latin was increasingly preferred in the early 20th century due to economic reasons. It took less space to print a text in Latin compared to the same text set in Javanese, which was understandable since, as we have seen before, Javanese type designers did deliberately pick one of the most elaborate and least compact handwriting style as their ideal form. Printing in Latin at the time kept books affordable to the general populace, which are often proficient in both Latin and Javanese script anyway. There were attempts to make more economical Javanese type, such as this one by the Amsterdam Type Foundry, but the result was very uncanny and it did not catch on. Then, while all of this is going on, the Javanese typographic scene came into a grinding halt due to the messy period. The popular use of the Javanese script vanished in this period and did not recover after the war was over. And that sadly brings us to the decline of the Javanese script. Because of the messy period, the use of the Javanese script and all other Indonesian script, as a matter of fact, became less substantial and often tokenized. All practical use of the Javanese script today has been supplanted by the Latin alphabet. The Javanese script is only used marginally and oftentimes crudely, as we will see later. From early 2000s to now, the use of the Javanese script is, for the most part, faced with many issues, such as minimal effort implementation. Even though the script is still taught briefly in schools, there are no longer publications or new reading materials that use the Javanese script, and it is also minimally used in the environment. The next problem is limited and inadequate font. Shown here in the bottom is the default font that often used today. And I'm going to be partial here. I don't like the current default font. You can see that many details of its design are not well executed and it lacks refinement. It looks completely removed from how the Javanese script looks like in actual manuscript and prints. Even if a font has impeccable typographic design, many devices unfortunately does not support complex Javanese rendering, and many users today had to go through a lot of hoops just to get proper Javanese display. All of this leads to less than satisfactory results. Official street signs and private signages are plagued with basic mistakes. Most Javanese people today know the existence of the script and recognize a few letters. But it is rare to find someone who can read and write it in a meaningful manner. Oftentimes, people type whatever and did not bother to check what they type. And even if they're willing to ask, it's hard to find someone who had the competence to answer and guide these kind of questions. Since the public had to make do with single monotone fonts, many people could not tell the difference between natural variants and shapes that are simply wrong. And this is especially bad for designers who often work with a very narrow visual conception of what constitutes as the Javanese script. And so, to address this issue, it has been my personal goal to introduce the rich design legacy of the Javanese script as well as its potential application on the contemporary design landscape. One of my earliest attempts at this is the exercise of Javanizing international brand logotypes. Here we have, for example, Coca-Cola, and then Nike, Sprite, and Lindt chocolate. The basic gist of it is that I transcribe the name of the brand phonetically into the Javanese script and then merge that transliteration with the original Latin design to render the Javanese logo. One of the most prominent aspect of this Javanese attempt is that the average Javanese letter requires more horizontal space than Latin. So oftentimes, whenever I'm doing this, the Javanese version tends to widen naturally into quite noticeable degree, and you have to balance and counter that with slightly thinner strokes and whatnot. With this in mind, transliterating Latin logotype into Javanese has become an enlightening practice, and one of my fun experience is transliterating film titles for the Instagram account Titles in Translation, which was then presented in TypeCon 2018. And here's another one of my attempts, which sadly I did not make it in time to be submitted for TypeCon, but it was fun to make. Other than one-shot logotype, I also made fonts and give them to communities or interested parties as time permits. One of my earliest font is this, Nawatura. And then there's Bangil, which adapted a style used in the letter from the region of Bangil to send to Thomas Stamford Raffles in 1816. This is Yogyakarta. An interesting story about this is that the city of Yogyakarta, one of the most prominent center of Javanese culture, issued its own logo and font for the city without a Javanese script, and I thought it's a shame, and so why not make a Javanese script expansion for the font so that the Javanese and Latin text can be shown side by side harmoniously. And then we have Istaka, an homage to the Emboto style, which is bold, geometric, and somewhat futuristic, I would say. And then we have Bakul, which is inspired by casual brush style. My commissioned work include the revamping of Noto-san's Javanese font. The first version of Noto-san's Javanese, which is still the default in many mobile devices, adapted the Amsterdam's Type Foundry experimental design. And this is problematic because while it may be an interesting display type alternative, it is very difficult to read. and mostly illegible, and it confuses new readers when presented as normal Javanese text type. So I was brought in to revamp this Noto Sans Javanese into a version that is more user friendly and legible to Javanese readers. At first, I presented the option whether Monotype and Google want the font to be revised or to make a completely new design, and the new design option was chosen. And after that, making the behavior of the font and all of its conjuncts and combinations, which were previously not uh, which was previously not found in the original Noto Sans Javanese, was laid out and refined until we have the second version of Noto Sans Javanese, released in 2019. And for discerning associates whose business like to include Javanese script, I also help consult on making transliteration, giving options, pointing out details that can be flourished and which that should be kept plain, varying shapes to fit better with the original logo, etc. And this, for example, here is a pizza franchise in modern day Surakarta who has just put up this new lightbox about a month ago. Since 2010, increasing awareness of the Javanese script, spearheaded by young communities of enthusiasts and designers, has slowly improved the design landscape of the script. Communities such as Segajabung in Yogyakarta host classes on installing and using the script on devices such as laptop and smartphone. Segajabung also introduced members to digitized Javanese manuscript and publications that are available online, such as those from the British Library and Wikimedia. And having access to these tools greatly enhances the discussion of the script. New small to medium enterprises, such as Banu, now offer merchandise that integrated Javanese script, among others, as part of their distinct visual identity. Javanese script elements that looks actually designed is surprisingly rare up to this point, and many still only copy paste what they found on the internet. Over the years, I came to be acquainted with other talented and enthusiastic individuals who are also intrigued with exploring the Javanese typeface. For one of them is Arif Budiarto, who I often collaborated with in creating a Javanese typeface. There's also Nur Holis, who made many application of the Javanese script in logotype and whatnot to show its diverse ability to adapt to many styles. And we have Adian Gunarta, who published a short story written with the Javanese script, a very rare thing these days. He also contributed to the TypeCon in transliterating the Ladybird film logotype shown here. And also there's Wisnu Adi Kusuma in Surakarta, who is also inspired by the many varied style of the Javanese script in pre-independence practice, and so many of his work is sort of an homage to those typographic practice of the past. While there are still lots of hurdles to overcome, seeing some of this contemporary work made with respect and labor of love fills me with hope that the Javanese script would one day flourish again. And so came to this presentation. Thank you for listening, and I believe after this would be the question Q&A time. And okay, so thanks again for listening.